ugly, scaly, lizard-like beings that seemed in some ways to represent her struggle with some reptilian energies of her own. But then I spoke with a native woman, a Peruvian shaman, about her encounters, and she said, in contrast to our kind of Judeo-Christian relationship to the reptilian beings, she said that the serpent energy was was an energy that she could enter into fully because she felt one with it. One of my people I've worked with who studies shamanism described an encounter with an anaconda like snake, and it twirled and it twirled and it twirled, and then it became like she was inside of a spaceship. So it was like her encounters with the reptilians was much more of a kind of spiritual connection. I was struck by Dan McAvoy's comment that the blood samples they took from the this being that Jonathan Reed, I don't know whether you believe it or not, but he did say that the blood samples had a kind of human and reptilian nature to the genome that was discovered there. There is a huge range of attitudes that people have toward the reptilian beings. On the whole, they don't have a good reputation. Here's Donna, who I've worked with for several years, who tends to have a somewhat victim-like relationship to all of her experiences in her world, but she described this great distress, an encounter with these beings, reptilian beings in a cave, lizard-like beings with the green, with the scaly ones with a very thick, a big snout and a thick, hard chest, and she described at one point like a little dinosaur, like a little T-Rex, very vicious. One of them tried to rape her, she said, and she described it as like, those Japanese dragon-type lizards, she said. And she said that in addition to trying to rape, she saw them eating babies. It was horrible, I mean, her description. But then I've also worked with people who feel that they are in some way identified with this race of beings, that they represent an ancient race that they are somehow part of or connected with or were once connected with. Paul described his own identification with an ancient race of reptilian beings who were compassionate and understanding, who were able, and he was able. They were akin to the dinosaurs on the earth and had some relationship with them. Now I'll tell you a little bit more about Dana. Dana is a entertainer, now in her early 50s, who has had a very powerful sexual contact with an alien being, or a reptilian being, which was in no way. She was scared at first, but it was an ecstatic experience. It was a powerful connection for her, and it represented for her. She discovered, in a sense, in this her own warrior energy. She said it was almost as if he were a part of myself who I was meeting in that exchange, that sexual exchange, as if my own energy were incarnated in that fierce warrior, and I was really making love with a different reptilian aspect of myself. I feel as if my energy is distinctly reptilian, bold, and warrior-like. Now, she actually has written a manuscript which isn't published, which is one of the reasons I don't want to identify her. Some of you might be able to, but she's talked about a reptilian hierarchy. She's very familiar with this whole area. There's a huge dragon-like figure she calls Draco, which is the Greek word for dragon, that is 15 feet tall, has wings, takes her up, and it's really far out, right? I mean, this is beyond where even I could go, but she's a person of very solid, sound mind. She's also had encounters with other more delicate snake-like beings, and she's played a role as a diplomat, as kind of leader of a sort of snake tribe that makes peace among the reptilians. She described a friend of hers who had a reptilian relationship, a guy she calls Mick, and he apparently confronted one of these alien beings. He said, "Man, you're ugly." And the alien said, "You should see what you look like to us." Now, she has had herself a very powerful connection with an alien race that became extinct. Now, Barbara Lamb, where are you, Barbara? Barbara is here. Barbara has done regression with this person, and I want her to tell you about, because her relationship with this race came out in this regression. So, Barbara, would you come up and join me here?
This was just a few years ago, and I had the great privilege and pleasure and fascination of regressing Dana to this experience. And I had known that she had had experiences with them in this life, including some of the sexual experiences. So we just didn't know what we were going to go into when we did the regression. But basically, the question that we asked, or the issue that we focused on in doing the regression, was what is her connection originally, or that is, what is the source of her connection with these reptilian beings? And in the regression, she went to a whole scene which she sensed was a long, long time ago. She thought it seemed like it might be another planet just because of the coloration of the ground and the sky and so forth. And in this regression, she was a reptilian being. She was a male. And she was strong, as John described it. She was strong and husky and powerful and proud and straight. And she was the leader of a reptilian group of males. And in this particular happening, she was standing on top of a tall bluff with a whole troop of these reptilian beings around her. And they were looking forward in a certain direction, off into the distance, and they could see that there was a huge wave of heat and colored light, red, yellow light coming toward them. They knew it was disaster. She didn't know if it was a nuclear blast or just what it was, but they knew that they were facing the end. And the magnificent thing about this was that instead of their buying into fear, as most of us would do and running around, they just stood firm. They linked arms, they linked consciousness with their minds. They had total telepathic communication. And she led them in having agreement that they would stand firm and receive the energy of this terrific wave of destruction that was coming to them, instead of running from it or trying to avoid it. So they were getting ready to just receive it with all the cells in their bodies and their mind and all of their consciousness, knowing that as their physical bodies would be destroyed, that their consciousness, their spirits, yes, reptilians can even have spirits, that their spirits would be surviving and would be transformed into a different dimension. And for her, she was so proud of these beings, proud of herself, with all the strength that they had and the communication they had.
Did you just very briefly, you want to say that you're on?
Yeah. Okay. And then there's another thing I'd like to share too, and that is an experience that happened to me personally in this lifetime just a very few years ago. I had already been doing a few years of regression work with experiences of extraterrestrial contact, including experience with some reptilian contacts. And one day, having done some appointments or whatever, I was just walking through the living room in my house, and suddenly, pop, right in front of me, to my enormous surprise, was a reptilian being. He was a little bit taller than I. Now, normally in this life, if I'd seen a reptile of any kind, even a little one, in my living room, I would have been really freaked out. I'm not very comfortable with reptilian beings. But anyway, with this experience, conscious, awake, experience. I saw this reptilian being standing in my living room. I went right